I'm Denise.
She's a non-fiction editor, and I'm Louise.
She's a fiction editor. And together,
we're the Editing Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Editing Podcast. So in this episode and the next one, we're going to focus on 10 tools that can help any editor or proofreader work more efficiently.
Yeah, and who doesn't want to do that? Every time we increase our efficiency, we save time. And that means we make space for other stuff in our life, whether that means getting other things done in our business that we've been thinking about and planning, or personal stuff like time for family and friends and self-care.
Yeah, and if we're working to a fixed fee on a project, being more efficient means we earn a better hourly rate, which means more money in the bank for a little less work and without compromising on quality.
Exactly. So in this episode, we're going to chat about a consistency checker, macros, text expanders, social media schedulers, and choosing the best time of day to focus on editing work. And we'll also look at any costs you'll need to think about too.
Yeah. So the first efficiency tool is PerfectIt, one of the most well-loved tools by professional editors and something neither of us would be without. If you're a new entrant to the field of editing and proofreading, it's absolutely worth trialing this.
Definitely. So PerfectIt is software developed by a company called Intelligent Editing, and it helps editors and authors check a Word document for consistency, for example, spelling, capitalization, hyphenation, and acronym definitions, and adherence to style preferences, for example, how numbers are rendered, punctuation of lists, capitalization of titles, and IZE and ISE suffixes.
And the beauty of it is that it's customizable, so you can create your own style sheets within it so that PerfectIt searches for instances in the document that don't match the style preferences that you've set up.
And what it's doing for editors is basically the heavy lifting, isn't it? I mean, it's not doing things the human brain can't handle. It's just doing that work on our behalf and faster.
Yeah, and that means we can spend more of our time helping authors craft compelling text rather than hunting down important but small details. I don't know about you, Louise, but I take an absurd amount of satisfaction in using this software as a first, middle, and final pass over an editor proofread. I just feel like it's got my back.
I totally get that. It's deeply satisfying. And I really like how it helps me build a style sheet for my client too, because when I run it at the beginning of a project, it helps me see the lie of the land and start making decisions that I can build on.
Oh, totally, yeah. And we should also mention that it has a built-in style sheet that supports the Chicago Manual of Style, because for editors who use CMOS, it's a thing of, well, Louise, I know you use it in your fiction editing a lot, so why don't you say it?
It's a thing of beauty. So with version 5 of PerfectIt, editors can now access and learn CMOS style preferences in tandem with their consistency checking. We'll put a link in the show notes to a blog post I wrote in which I explore in more detail how it works. But anyway, PerfectIt is a gorgeous time saver. So if you're working with text in Microsoft Word, it's absolutely worth exploring.
So in terms of cost, annual licenses start at around £76 at the time of recording here in 2023. So let's now talk about text expanders, because these were an absolute revelation to me when I discovered them. So what we're dealing with here is applications that allow you to automatically paste larger chunks of pre-written text into a document by typing just a few letters.
Oh, that's absolutely brilliant time savers. So there are various options available, including Text Expander and Phrase Express. But search around on Google and decide which one's best for you. There are plenty to choose from.
Yeah, and these really come into their own when you've got a piece of text that you regularly type. So it could be an email signature or an explanation of why you've edited text in a particular way.
Or it could be the text you always include at the end of a blog post, or the HTML code you regularly embed under an image on your website. And the Text Expander app costs about £35 a year. Phrase Express costs around £90, but it's for a one-off lifetime license.
Yeah. So let's talk now about macros. Yeah. So our colleague Paul Beverly is the editorial world's macro king. There are literally hundreds to choose from, so we're not going to dig into those here, but you can listen to episode 23 in which we discuss some of our favourites.
Yeah. So if you've never used macros, they're basically commands that translate into various actions. So for example, you might run a macro that searches the document you're working on and then generates a list of all the proper nouns so you can check for spelling inconsistencies.
Proper nounalize.
Yeah.
Or you might run one so that when you place your cursor in front of a word, it changes the case. The options are endless, and Paul's worked really hard to think about what editors and proofreaders need to do when they're polishing text in Microsoft Word.
That's such a good point, Denise. He really has. He's really thought about. He loves creating these, but he does his work in this field is just so purposeful and so mindful. And here's something really lovely. They're all free.
Yeah,
I know. It's amazing, and using them will save you oodles of time. So check out the link to Paul's website in the show notes.
Yeah, it is a game changer, definitely. So let's talk now about making your social media marketing more efficient. Now, if you're an editor or proofreader who's already regularly blogging, podcasting, or creating video as a way of making your business more visible in the search engines, then you'll want to deliver that stuff via social media.
And that can be really time consuming. So one way to get around that is to use a scheduler in which you can automate some of that work for you. So 2 options, there are loads and loads to choose from, but just 2 we're going to mention are SmarterQueue and Buffer.
Yeah, so SmarterQueue costs around £250 a year, while Buffer has a free, though rather limited plan that's definitely worth experimenting with if you're starting out in your content marketing journey. And then it has paid levels as well.
Yeah, so I think something like SmarterQueue is only worth it once you're sure that you're really committed to using social media to promote your content. That way, the investment's definitely worth it because you can basically set delivery of your posts and then forget about them.
Yeah, exactly. And Buffer is similar, but it's not as expensive. And there are others as well. And it's definitely worth searching around to find which one suits you, which interface you like. Depending on the platforms that you want to schedule to.
And your budget.
And your budget, absolutely. Always budget friendly. Yeah. So our final efficiency tool for this episode will not cost you a bean. It's about working out what time of day you're at your best when it comes to editing.
Yeah, so we both talked about this before, but I've realised over the years that while I tend to be at my most creative at night time when it comes to marketing my business, I'm actually a way more efficient editor for around 9 till 2. What about you, Denise? I mean, I know the answer already.
So I mentioned this in another episode, and that's that I've tended to convince myself that I'm more efficient in the afternoon, but that's because I was getting up so late that's the only time I was actually editing. But actually, I'm more efficient in the morning too.
Yeah, it's funny how bad I'm so appalling at editing when I'm in bed. Don't get much done when you're asleep.
Funny that, isn't it? When you're horizontal with your eyes shut.
So the way to work out when you're at your most efficient is to keep a record of when you're editing and how long it takes you. And if you do this over the course of a couple of weeks or a month, you'll have some data you can analyze.
Yeah, basically you want to look out for patterns that you can use to help you plan your day. Now, of course, there will be days when for one reason or another you have to do things differently, but at least you can factor that in.
Yeah, or days when you just want to have a lie in and you're going to pay the consequences. But yeah, but in the main, you're making your own body clock work for your business if you spot those patterns Denise talked about.
Yeah, and using something like Toggle or Clockify or one of these timer apps can be really helpful to just find the data and find where your strengths are. I just love looking at that sort of stuff.
Yeah, so do I.
Yeah. So that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to help support the Editing Podcast, you can join our Patreon community for only £3 a month.
We'd love to have you on board. So if you're interested, hop over to patreon.com editing podcast /editing podcast. All our patrons get exclusive access to a huge batch of transcripts, and we'll pop a link in the show notes for you. In the meantime, she's been Denise.
And she's been Louise. Join us again next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.